Hey guys, welcome to the Hacked Existence tutorial on soft modding the Sony Playstation Classic. So by the end of this video, I will show you guys how to load Project Eris onto a fresh new PSC, and then we'll look at how to back up all of your original PlayStation game discs onto a thumb drive. So the whole thing will be self-contained. It's got virtual memory cards, game save states, all of that all built in. We'll take a look at the vast library of ports and mods for Project Eris. So specifically, we'll look at DOSBox and Windows 3.1. Because this is USB, you can plug a keyboard and mouse into it, in addition to a slew of other mods that exist for Project Eris, things like Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem, Tomb Raider, all the classic PC games. And then beyond Project Eris, we'll look at Retroarch and Emulation Station that'll also install, and that'll give us emulation for about another 25 to 30 or so consoles and platforms. And again, we'll load that whole library right onto this thumb drive, so the whole thing will be self-contained. We'll throw a wireless card in it and get it on our network so that we can SSH into it as root and play with the operating system, SCP files back and forth. And then we'll wrap it up by looking at the 8-bit DO controller to get our DualShock 3 PlayStation 3 wireless controller all hooked up. So by the end of this, you guys will have a PlayStation Classic console with the whole game library loaded onto a thumb drive, making this thing ultra portable. It's all modern day. So you're going to have HDMI into any modern display. You're going to power the whole thing off a USB. We'll have wireless controllers, the whole nine. So the whole classic line of consoles, the PlayStation Classic is by far my favorite. This is definitely an integral component for any console modder or retro game enthusiast. So let's jump in. All right, we're going to start with a fresh new PlayStation Classic. All right, so now we've got our PlayStation Classic. I pulled out a controller, the power cord, got the HDMI cord so we can hook that into a display. So the next thing we need to do is add storage. So I'm using the SanDisk Cruiser 256 gig thumb drive. And you'll notice this is a USB 2.0 flash drive. And so that thumb drive cost me 30 bucks off of Amazon. So the next thing that we're going to add is an OTG cable. I got this one for 10 bucks off of Amazon. But let's take a look at why we're going to use that. So I've got another PlayStation Classic here that I already took all the screws out of. So this is what the board looks like for the PlayStation Classic. Here we've got a quad-core ARM CPU, clocking in at 1.5 gigahertz. These are two 512 meg DDR3 RAM chips. So we've got 1 gig of RAM. This is 16 gig solid-state storage chip. We've got a GPU down here and a little USB bus controller up here. So they did a really interesting thing. There's a little circuit here and a matching one here, and those are basically current limiters for the USB bus. So they're limiting the current on these USB sockets to 5 volts at 100 milliamps, which is enough to power something like this, but doesn't work so well for something like this. So you have two options. ModMyClassics.com has a great tutorial on how to solder these together to restore the full 1.5 amps of current back out to the USB plugs. But instead of doing that, we can just pick up an OTG cable. This was 10 bucks on Amazon. And basically what we'll do is use this USB micro to plug into the back of the PlayStation Classic here, and then we will plug our power cord into the female socket. We'll make sure that the OTG switch is set, and this will basically give us 3 additional USB sockets for this board. And these are all going to be fully powered right off the main power source. So later on, we now have a home for our USB thumb drive that'll let us plug 2 controllers into here and play 2-player. So on another one of these ports, you can optionally add a wireless USB card. So I'm using this TP-Link one. Here is the model number. And basically you can plug this into another one of these sockets to put your PlayStation Classic on your wireless network. It has an SSH and an SCP server built in, so you can remote into it and play around with the operating system. You can move files on and off of it. Emulation Station will also leverage the wireless interface to talk to the internet to scrape all of the metadata about your video game libraries and really enhance the whole front end experience. So this is optional. You don't need this. And if you're going to leave it in after you build out your library, I recommend either hardening the PlayStation Classic or just pop that out of there. There's no reason to have it on your network after you've got it all set up. So another optional add-on that I'm going to do is the 8-bit DO wireless adapter for the PS Classic. Basically, this is a controller adapter that has a huge range of compatibility, so it's going to work with controllers from all of these modern consoles. I myself am going to be using the DualShock 3 because I think it is extremely close to the original PlayStation controllers and has the added bonus of wireless. So these are 20 bucks each on Amazon. If you want 2 players to be both wireless, grab 2 of these. All right, so now we will take our thumb drive and go plug it into the computer. All right, so now we have to format the thumb drive as FAT32, which is why I'm using Ubuntu Linux. I tried to do this with a vanilla install of Windows 10, but it doesn't appear that there's a utility built in that'll format a thumb drive in FAT32. So if you're using Windows, you're gonna have to find a utility to do that. I'm going to go to Applications, Accessories, and Disks and pull up the thumb drive, click these cogs here, do Format Partition, and I'm going to give it a volume level label of Sony, all caps, and I'm going to select FAT. And while that's formatting, I will go to Internet and Chrome, and we will go to ModMyClassic.com. And from here, I'll go to the menu and go to Project Eris. We'll scroll all the way down, and we will download Project Eris version 1 full package, and I will open that up and I will extract that to the root of the thumb drive. Alright, so that took quite a while to complete, not because there was a lot of data to write, but because there was a lot of files to write, and it's writing at USB 2.0 speed, so you really have to be patient there. But now that the extraction is complete, we will eject that drive, and now that the Sony has disappeared, I can pull the thumb drive out of the computer and we can jump back over to the PSC. All right, now I'm just gonna power cycle the PlayStation Classic one time because it's never been turned on before, so I wanna do any initialization that might occur. I'm gonna plug in the HDMI, a controller, and the power cord, and we'll fire it up. All right, now we can see we've got our PlayStation Classic with all the built-in 20 games that it comes with. Everything looks good. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off. I'm going to unplug the power out of the back, and I'm going to plug the USB thumb drive into the second controller port, plug the power back in, and now we'll boot it up and let it install Project Eris. Alright, now that the console has turned itself off, we'll pull the power out of it, we'll pull the thumb drive out of it, and we'll go plug this back into the computer. And we can see all the files that got loaded, so I'm going to create a new file on the desktop here called PSC Backup. And I'm going to copy everything from the thumb drive and paste it into that new folder. Alright, now that we've made a backup of everything from the thumb drive, I'm going to reformat it using the disks utility again. This time we're going to make it an NTFS partition, and again, Sony all caps as the volume label, otherwise this won't work. And now that that format is complete, I'm just going to copy everything from the backup and paste it back into our fresh thumb drive. Okay, now we'll eject that thumb drive and then go make sure it plugs into the PlayStation Classic. All right, now we're just going to plug that thumb drive back into player 2, plug some power in, and we'll fire it up. All right, now we can see we have a fully installed Project Eris with Retroarch and Emulation Station. So I'm going to start by going to L1 for settings, and I'm just going to toggle boot menu music to off, and I'll save. Alright, so now if we go into Project Eris itself, we can see here we have our console with our original 20 games that were preloaded on there along with some other icons. So up next, let's take a look at how to back up one of our original PlayStation game discs. Alright, now I'm going to stick the thumb drive back into the computer. And here we can see the file system on the thumb drive. I'm going to go into the transfer folder here. And what I'm going to do is copy a bin and queue file of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater that I made in a prior video using Windows with IMG burn. Alright, now that I've placed a copy of the backup of the game disk that I made into the transfer folder on the thumb drive, I'm going to go ahead and eject it and we'll stick it back in the PSC. Alright, so now before we boot up the PlayStation Classic, it's a good time to introduce the OTG cable. So I'm going to plug the thumb drive into one of the sockets here, plug this cable back into the power port. And then I'll make sure that the switch is set to OTG, and then I'll plug the power into this female adapter here. And now we'll boot the PlayStation Classic. And now if we go into Project Eris, we'll see that the Tony Hawk game that we just installed is now available in our carousel. So now that we know how to install PlayStation games, we'll go ahead and shut down the PlayStation Classic. We'll stick the thumb drive back in the computer and we'll look at theming out Project Eris. Alright, now to download the Project Eris themes from the Project Eris homepage here, we're going to scroll down to where it says Project Eris theme mods, download here. And I've noticed this happens from time to time where this iframe won't load, so we can't actually get to the download. So what I'm going to do is go to the Retroarch cores, And on this page, they have a link to the LibreTro sources. So down here, I'll go to Project Eris and Themes, and here's the 5 themes that I can download. So I'm going to download all 5 of these mod packages. And you can read about each one in these readmes here. But basically what we need to do now is plug in our thumb drive. And when that opens up, I'll go to my downloads here, and I'm going to cut all 5 of those mod files. And on my thumb drive, I'm going to go into Project Eris in the mods folder, and I'll paste all 5 of those there. And I'll eject the thumb drive, and we'll boot the PlayStation Classic again. All right, now I'll plug this thumb drive back in, and we will boot the PlayStation Classic. And you can see during boot, the mods for the themes get installed. All right, now that we're up and running, we'll hit L1 and we'll scroll down to this selected theme here. And I'm gonna do Retro Wave. You can definitely play around with these. Now I'll hit start and hit yes. And now we can see our Project Eris has a whole new theme to it. So now I'll walk you guys through installing 4 more mods to Project Eris, and then we'll jump over to Retroarch and Emulation Station. So let's turn off the PlayStation Classic. We'll move the thumb drive back over to the computer. All right, now back on the Project Eris homepage, we're going to scroll down here, and normally we would go to Project Eris mods and ports, but again, that's down. So we're going to go to the Retroarch cores and follow the link to the LibreTro sources. We're going to go down to Project Eris mods 1.0. And here there's a bunch of mods for Project Eris. So you can scroll through all these readmes. You can see all these different emulators and game ports that they have. And all of these have a little how-to on how to install each one. Some of them are going to work out of the box. Some of them are going to require BIOSes. Some of them are going to require game files. So just follow the readme. But the 4 that I'm going to install are DOSBox, Drastic, PPSSPP, and Win311. So Drastic is our Nintendo DS emulator, PPSSPP is the PSP emulator. Those are both going to work out of the box. DOSBox is going to take a little configuration, and Win311 will have to put the install files on there. But first what we're going to do is go to our downloads, and I'm going to cut all 4 of those mod files, and we'll go onto our thumb drive in Project Eris in mods, paste those, and then I'm going to go ahead and load in this Twisted Metal head-on ISO. This is a PSP ISO. If you watched my PSP video, I showed you how to take the game disc and create this ISO. So now I'm just going to copy that and paste it into ROMs PSP. And so you can stick all of your PSP ISOs here, and then inside of ROMs, NDS is where you're going to want to stick your Nintendo DS emulator ROMs for Drastic to work. So now let's eject this thumb drive and boot the PSP to install those mods. All right, so our mod file is installed during boot there, and now we can see we've got this extra menu for the PSP emulator, and there's our game Twisted Metal head-on. So exiting back out of here. Now if we go into Project Eris, in our carousel here, we can see that we now have the Drastic DS emulator, so we can load up the DS games into that NDS folder. If we scroll through the carousel over here to DOSBox, we can launch that now. And you'll see that it's attempting to mount the C drive to a directory that doesn't exist. So we're going to create that in a minute here. And to use DOSBox, all we have to do is plug in a USB mouse and keyboard to our USB ports here. And then we can load up all of our DOS games. And now the last thing that we'll look at is our Windows 3.1 launcher. And we can see that we need to do an install of Windows 3.1 using Circle. But first we need to put the Windows install files onto the thumb drive now that the mod has been installed and created the directory structure for us. So again, we'll go ahead and shut down the PlayStation Classic and move back over to the computer. All right, so now to fix the DOSBox problem we have, we're going to go to this directory on our thumb drive. And in here, there's already a folder called DOSBox. I'm just going to copy it and make a copy of it, and then I'm going to rename it DOSBoxGL, and that solves our DOSBox problem. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is take my Windows 3.11 install file, and this is basically a backup of the 6 floppies to install Windows 3.11, and inside the Win311 on the thumb drive, inside the application folder, you can see there's already a folder here called install. I'm just going to merge these contents together And now when we're done, basically this application folder is going to be the equivalent of the C drive on Windows 3.1. And in the DOSBox GL, this application folder is basically C: inside of DOSBox. So now if you want to load any DOS games or programs or executables or files or anything, you dump them into here and this is going to show up in C: inside of DOSBox. Same thing for Windows 3.11. Now this application folder is basically your C drive. So now I'll go ahead and eject this again, and we'll go and boot the PlayStation Classic and get Windows 3.1 installed. All right, back in Project Eris here. We'll launch the Windows 3.1 launcher, and then we'll hit circle to install Windows 3.1. And now I'll use the keyboard to run through the setup. All right, now we have a working Windows 3.1 install. And we can see here we're up and running with Solitaire. So now that Windows 3.1 is all set up, we will shut down the PlayStation Classic, switch back over to the computer, and get Retroarch up and running. Okay, so before we go any further, we have to understand the difference between Retroarch and Emulation Station. So Retroarch is like our back end, and Emulation Station is like the front end. Basically what that means is that you load what are called cores into Retroarch. Cores are going to provide emulation for a system or a console, and sometimes there's multiple cores for a console, and so they'll provide varying levels of compatibility with different games. But we're just going to install this allcores.zip, which has a bunch of the default cores already baked into it, and we're going to do that by extracting it right into this directory. So once we do that, Retroarch will have the ability to emulate all of the systems provided by those cores. Emulation Station then is used as a front end to hold your video game library and let you sift through it by adding metadata and things like ratings and descriptions and cover art, and it lets you just really navigate the library because Retroarch makes it really rough. You're just navigating at the file system level. So the link between Emulation Station and Retroarch is this essystems.cfg, which is found in this directory. And so basically if you want to change the core you're using, you need to define it in this file here. Whenever you launch a game in Emulation Station, it's going to look in this file to see which core to load into Retroarch to actually launch the game. Log information from Emulation Station can be found in the eslog.txt file. That's really useful for debugging. And if you want more info on each core, you can go into this directory where you can figure out all of the requirements if there's additional things. So for example, all of these systems here are going to work from our all cores default pack. So all we have to do is just stick all of our ROMs in these folders here. But these systems down here require a little extra work. You're going to need to install a BIOS, so I've put the notes into here about how to deal with each one of those. So what we're going to do is start by downloading this allcores.zip and extracting it into here on the thumb drive. Alright, now that we've extracted all of the cores onto the thumb drive, I'm going to throw a couple ROMs into the respective directories here, and we'll jump back over to the PlayStation Classic. Alright, if we go into Emulation Station, here we can see we've got Nintendo, and inside of there is Super Mario Bros. 3. So if I hit X right now, Emulation Station will call Retroarch to launch Super Mario Bros. 3 with the NES emulator. So as you fill in all of your ROMs, all of the different consoles and platforms will start showing up in that list, and you can scroll through them. One of the things that we'll notice is that there's no metadata. We've got no rating, no release, no developer, no picture. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to Start and Quit and shut the system down. And now I'm going to plug the TP-Link wireless card into the PlayStation Classic and boot it back up. And now I'll go L1 to Settings, and I'll scroll down to Network Support, hit X to toggle it on, and then hit Start, and this will cause a reboot. Alright, now I'll hit R1 to go into the Network Manager, and you'll see the 2.4 gigahertz networks in range, so I'll pick mine and enter in my Wi-Fi passcode. And now down at the bottom there, we can see we've got an IP address from DHCP. So now we'll go back into Emulation Station, and I'll go into one of the emulators here, and I'll hit Start, and we'll go to the scraper, and I'll just select all the defaults and do Scrape Now. And now we can see we've filled in all the metadata about our game. So as long as you fill out your whole game library and then run the scraper, you'll pull down all the metadata and have a really nice front end. So now the next thing we're going to do is get our wireless PlayStation 3 controller up and running. So we'll go ahead and shut this off and jump back over to the computer. Alright, so now that we have our PlayStation Classic connected to our wireless network, I'm just going to pop a terminal here, and I will SSH -L root 192.168.1.237. Yes. And you can see it lets us write in without any password. So this is why you need to either unplug that wireless adapter when you're done or harden the system, because your PlayStation Classic is basically sitting on your network accepting root SSH connections with no password. So at this point, we've got a shell on the PlayStation Classic as root that we can now play around with. In addition to that, you can use something like FileZilla to move files on and off using SCP over port 22. Again, username root blank password. So now that we have that all set up, we'll pull up the 8BitDO website, 8bitdo.com. I'll go to the support tab. We'll go to more and download the PS3 pairing tool. And now what I'm going to do is hold down the pairing button on the 8BitDO receiver and plug it into the MacBook. And you'll see it says retro receiver connected. Then I'll plug the USB cable plugged into my DualShock 3 controller. And you'll see it says PS3 controller connected. So now I'll click pair. And paired OK. So now we'll pop this out and slide back over to the PlayStation Classic. Alright, now that Project Eris is booted up with our 8BitDO adapter in here, I'm going to hit the PlayStation button. And it takes a minute to sync, but eventually it goes on to number 1, and now we can go into Project Eris. And now we have a fully functioning DualShock 3 PlayStation 3 controller with our PlayStation Classic. So at this point, you guys should have a fully modded out PlayStation Classic running Project Eris. You've got storage to back up your entire game library. You've got wireless to stick it on your network and SSH and SCP to it. You've got wireless controllers from PlayStation 3 or a slew of other more recent controllers that you can hook up through the 8BitDO adapter. The PlayStation Classic does HDMI. You can power it off of USB. Everything's ready to go. So now it's time to go play some video games. As always, stay tuned and thanks for watching.